In this video, we're going to talk about our air compressor and why I choose the Senko PC 1010N. And we're also going to talk about best practices to make sure that it runs reliably for a long time. First, I use the PC 1010. I think I've been using it now for probably about 8 years. And the thing that stands out in my mind most is that it's just reliable. I've never had this compressor just simply break down in the middle of an event. They just keep working. They may not work as well over time, but they never quit. Some of the reasons why I chose this is, first, it's small and light, it's reasonably quiet, and it's reasonably affordable. Some of the drawbacks is it's barely powerful enough for t-shirt airbrushing. So when we're airbrushing t-shirts, it's running more often than it's not. It's got a very long duty cycle. That means that it's going to run hot. So I have some tips that I'm going to include in this video on how we keep the air compressor cool to ensure that it has a longer life. It is an oilless piston type compressor, so you don't ever have to put oil in it. And the recommended operating pressure is 60 pounds. I think any lower than that and your paint won't reliably flow. Any higher than that and the compressor will just work too hard. I've tried other brands, but I keep coming back to the Senko. Next, we're going to talk about keeping it cool, because that's a big part of making sure that this compressor runs reliably. Like I said, it has a very long duty cycle and it runs hot. You can see that I've cut off part of the plastic heat guard that goes over the piston. It's not exactly the safest thing, but it does help with the air circulation around the piston. And I also provide small fans. I would advise that you point the fan at this piston instead of the electric motor, because that's where really all of the heat is generated. If you're painting outside, keep this air compressor out of the sun. And if you're set up with a skirted table, I would avoid keeping the compressor underneath. It does get hot under a table, especially if you have more than one air compressor, and it will make a difference. So if you have the ability to put the compressor behind the table or out of view from the public, that's good, as long as it's not underneath the table. If you must put it underneath the table, just lift the skirt or the tablecloth enough so that some fresh air from outside can get in. If you smell hot metal, I think most of us know what hot metal smells like a radiator when it gets hot. That might be a warning sign that either the fan isn't on or it's not pointed at the pump. I find that compressors that run too hot over time will get tired. That's what I call it, getting tired. Basically, the compressor will run a longer and longer duty cycle, but never quite reach maximum pressure. Obviously, you want to check all your airbrushes and your manifold to make sure there are no leaks. In a quiet environment, charge your air compressor to full capacity and quietly listen to see if you can detect any air leaks. Fix those air leaks because they will cause the air compressor to kick on a lot more often than is needed. Once you have your airbrush equipment set up, if you must walk away from your airbrush station, I would recommend that you either unplug the air compressor or turn it off. If for any reason a hose might pop while you're not around, the air compressor will continue to run and get overheated. It's always best to turn off the air compressor at the pressure switch rather than simply unplugging it. So always use the pressure switch to turn off the air compressor at the end of the day. Obviously, you want to drain your air tank after each use. Condensation inside will rust the tank. Take note of where your reset switch is. The reset switch is tucked behind the electric motor, and if you press it while it's fully engaged, nothing will happen. But just like a circuit breaker, this little switch will pop out. If you're operating a compressor and this breaker is tripped, you may have to wait a little while for the motor to cool down before you can re-engage the breaker. The breaker may trip because of lack of power, if you're sharing an outlet with too many devices or too many air compressors, or there might be a short. Try to identify the problem before simply resetting the switch. When I give you the air compressor, we have the regulators set at 60 psi. Over time, this setting may change, and you may have to readjust the regulator. If you look on the regulator, there's a red ring. You have to rotate that in a counterclockwise manner to loosen it. After it's loosened, then you can adjust the regulator. Once you have the regulator set at the right pressure, and I do recommend running the air compressor while holding the trigger down on your airbrush to set the pressure. Once it's set, then you can rotate that ring clockwise again to tighten it. And that will hold the regulator in the right position. You'll notice that the air compressor comes with an extension cord that's semi-permanently attached with a zip tie. And I've duct taped a USB charging block to this extension cord. The charging block has 4 ports, so you can run 2 fans, your easel light, and actually charge a battery bank that you use for your displays, or you can charge your cell phone. I've included 2 fans with your setup. One can be used for you to keep you cool or to keep airbrush overspray away from your face, and the other can be used to cool your air compressor. After each event, wrap your cord around the motor and up above the pressure switch. Your air compressor uses a maximum of 4 amps, so on a standard 15 amp circuit, you can run about 3 air compressors. Many hotels and event halls use 20 amp circuits, so that means you could use as many as 5 air compressors on a 20 amp circuit. Avoid using extension cords that are too long, maybe over 50 feet, unless they are of heavy gauge. A gauge refers to the thickness of the cord. A small gauged cord that is very long will produce a lot of resistance in the cord, and that can cause a loss of power in the motor and actually overheat the motor as well. So again, the longer the cord or the smaller the gauge of the cord, the more resistance there will be and the more problems you'll have with your air compressor. It is possible to actually overheat and ruin a motor if you don't get ample voltage. This is also true if you have to share an outlet with many other devices or tools or air compressors, so be wary of that.